How are you?
Okay, you see me?
I see you. Enjoying
Okay,
the snow?
I see you. That's a very powerful line, because it means not only visual, but something else, the inside. So let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Primarily, do you want the outline of my career? Or I'm very prone to give you a history where the emphasis is more on what's going on emotionally and psychologically than externally. But that's at the expense of the activities.
So
So,
why don't we try to strike a balance? So give me just enough. I want you to share what you want to share, and I know what you want to share is the emotional goings on, but it's hard to understand the emotional part if we don't have the context.
okay, I will give you the outline of my business career, which consists of four periods. The first, when I came out of college, as I told you, I was disillusioned about psychoanalysis,
Why?
and I did not want to apply to medical school and go that route. I had finished
Why were you disillusioned?
because the psychoanalyst did not help me at all. I went to him 4 days a week for 2 years, and I was putting off applying to medical school while I did that. And for those 2 years, the easiest thing to do was to work for my father, which was never on my mind. My father had a business, as I've told you, mostly display fabrics. Um, so that was a crisis in my life. And the analyst was behind me, and I kept getting sicker and sicker in terms of telling him what I was going through. I'm a big talker, as you know, and I got a PhD in pathology. So I felt I was not fit to be a psychoanalyst, a psychotherapist, and go to medical school, which would be a prerequisite. Uh, in addition to which, I was working with my father, and a very funny thing happened. My brother also was struggling to find a meaning in life, and he had been working for my father for something approaching 2 years. I'm not exactly sure. He was rearranging the playroom and the shipping room, doing all internal work. My father gave him total freedom, and that was his interest, and that's what he did. I walked into the business, and Abe asked me, well, what do you want to focus on? I said, I think I'd like to focus on sales. So I went all over the place taking clippings of everything he had in stock, put it into a suitcase. That took about, I don't know, 2 weeks. Went outside, headed west. We were on 35th Street. And I asked someone, where is the garment center? And the guy laughed at me because it was so funny. And he said, well, it's all the big buildings on 6th, 7th, and 8th Avenue. And any one of them are just filled with garment manufacturers. So I walked into a building, 1400, and I see 50, 60 firms, all garment manufacturers. And I go to the top of the floor. I try walking into the showroom, and they scream at me and say, you have to go into the shipping area. And lo and behold, they have an elevator in the back where all the people who are selling, they use it. You go up in the back room, you knock, and a little portal opens. Usually the door doesn't open. And then he says, usually in a Jewish accent, so what do you got? And I said, I have fabrics, Kaplan products and textiles. I never heard of you. Wow. I got and I had a suit on. I was very proper, and it was August. It was very, very hot. I'm sweating away. And I start working my way down the floor. There are 4 or 5 firms per floor. When I get to the middle of the floor, there's firm, Amore Fashions. Knock, knock. What kind of fabrics you got, kid? I said, well, I have all sorts of novelty fabrics, including fabrics from the Far East. He says, yeah. He says, come in. So I come in and he looks at all my stuff and he grabs one sample and he disappears. Well, the owner of the company comes back. I used to know his name because of this one incident, it changed my career. So he came in and he says, how much of this stuff you got? I say, I don't know. He says, how much? I say, it's $1.15 a yard. He says, are you kidding? That's too much. That's ridiculous. He says, well, what is the name of the firm? He writes down Kaplan Products and Textiles. He says, come on, kid, you and I are going to go over to your firm and talk to your father. So he grabs me and we take the front elevator this time down and we go to Kaplan Products and Textiles. I'm exaggerating a little. This was not the first day. It may have been the third day. Okay. Morty had been there for 2 years in the showroom. And he comes back and talks to my father. Says, how much you got of this? And my father, I find out, had, I don't know, 10 or 12,000 yards of the goddamn thing that he had been stuck with for 4 years, which he had bought for a bargain price. He was a gambler. My father was a terrific gambler, much more than I am. And he says, how much you want? I said, well, $1.15. He says, I'll take everything at $1. And both my father and I almost fainted.
Wow.
And he took it. And this was not my first day. I'm exaggerating. It was like I was into it for 2 weeks. When I came across some more fashions, I got $80 a week. That was agreed salary, plus 5% commission. Well, the 5% commission was $1,000. $1,000 to me would be if I were to give you $25,000 because you wrote something. If you wrote a nice little poem and I gave you $25,000, you would be in shock, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
That's how I was. And I walk out and I think, holy moly, there's a whole world out here. 2 weeks later, I bought my first sailboat in Larchmont, Connecticut for $1,000.
No. Why? Didn't your father teach you better?
I wanted a sailboat. I got $85 a week. I was paying, I was with Simone, of course. We were paying maybe $80 or $75 a month in an apartment. It was a different world. So getting $85 a week, I could pay for the apartment. And I was not committed to marry Simone then. I was a free man. And I wasn't going to buy something for our future. I bought what I have always wanted, was a sailboat. And emotionally and psychologically, it was a turning point because I experienced the power of money and I experienced the power of freedom and the joy of hard work and success. I was wearing a suit and a tie, by the way, and it was July. It was like 90 degrees. The back elevators and so forth had no air conditioning.
Yeah.
So then I took clippings of all of Kaplan products and I went to the handbag trade. I completely went to the garment center.
Second. Was that sailboat that you bought with that $1,000 the same sailboat that I was on as a kid?
No.
No.
No, that was my third sailboat, a fourth sailboat.
Okay, fine.
I don't remember taking you out on the sailboat.
I remember.
Oh, I remember that. Actually, I do. Actually,
Yeah.
I do. But you see, it suddenly I'm thinking not of medical school and being a psychoanalyst, but I was thinking, this is fun. This is power. This is real. And I was always defective, as I emphasized. I think I bored you to death with the fact that Morty was a genius and everything, and I was a misfit. I bit my fingernails, I picked my nose, I picked every part of my body. I won't shock you, and I won't tell you what I did with it. Um, uh, so I went to the psychoanalyst and laid down. He was behind me, and I told him my dreams, and I was full of trauma, murder, homosexuality, uh, you name it. It wasn't a pathology that I now know of that I didn't have. I was very open to this stuff, very open. I wanted to murder my mother, my father, my
Oh,
brother.
grandpa. Okay. We don't have to go
So,
there.
so and he let me go like a broken record. And I needed, enough of this already. I want you to be open, but you're not supposed to verbally vomit here. You're supposed to focus on what's primarily on your mind. But I was very disillusioned with psychoanalysis. This guy Burris, who was he was one of the head psychoanalysts of New York City. My brother went to Arlo, who was the head of the Psychoanalytic Association, which was the premier association in New York City. We went to real celebrities, and neither of us was helped. But I loved making money and what I could do with money. I was dating Simone, as you know. I think I've told you about that part of it. So now that's what I did for the next, I would say, the next 5 years. But I opened up the garment trade to the business, which included a lot of imports. I opened up the handbag trade. Abe, my father, I always called him Abe, was always focused on the shoe industry, shoe fabrics,
Yeah.
Mostly in the morning, and other industries too. I started selling a lot of velveteen and velvet for people who made dolls, and they're
Why
very fluffy.
why do you think you were so successful at opening up all these different avenues when
I was a workaholic,
ah
and Morty was unable to do that. His emotional things. Morty was brilliant and articulate, but angry at having to do anything he didn't want to do.
hmm.
He didn't make a single sale. After me being there for about 9 months and everyone saying the kid is a hotshot, Morty left the business.
But why do you think you were so successful?
Because
Not
uh,
just workaholic.
I'm very much much my father. I adored my father, and I think I modeled myself after him. And my father, as I told you, came from total impoverishment and no education, but he achieved it through work. He said that there was, I forget the phrase, um, creativity and sweat. And of the two, sweat is far more important. And I could take that in and make it my goal. I was a worker. I was a obsessive worker. I had a very poor opinion of myself, and it motivated me in order to not be a reject. I had lived my life where my father was a nonstop talker and brilliant. My brother was a nonstop talker and brilliant, and I had nothing to say. So I had a very poor opinion of myself. It still comes out, but uh, making money and success uh, was thrilling. It was just thrilling to me. After 2 years, I married Simone. Now, do you want me to focus on what was going on emotionally and psychologically at that period, or just skip it and focus on my career? Because the career is interesting.
How about you sanitize it a little bit, but you can share.
It's hard to sanitize because it's hard. Simone was the first. Simone was the first person I had a deep relationship with. I did not want to marry her, but after being together for 2 years and intimate with each other, which was my first experience and hers too, in those days, you married the woman. You had ruined her. You had soiled her. You had shamed her. The least you could do, you son of a bitch, is marry her. That was very much there. It may be true in your culture, by the way. The religious culture is not that foreign. The general culture, by the way, is totally different. You could sleep with people without making a big commitment, but those are two different realms. But I went to get, I went to get, I had to learn how to waltz to get married. My father and mother was going to make a big wedding. And so I go at night to Arthur Murray, and this woman from Europe, my age, is teaching me how to waltz. And I find I'm falling in love with her. And I'm thinking to myself, what is going on here? I should not have married Simone. I did not do her a favor. And I think what happened later on was an outcome of that, that I didn't have the wherewithal to say, maybe we should just try experiencing other people. And I think that's exactly true of Simone too. If Simone had had the opportunity, and I don't want to shock you, but I believe it, sexual and emotional, with a whole variety of people, then she would be able to understand what would be right for her, what would fit her.
But Grandpa,
Her mother and
that's your
her
own
mother and father had basically a bad marriage, and she didn't have a model of what a good marriage was. So I feel bad for Simone, and I feel bad for myself. There are no villains here.
Yeah.
What can I tell you? Financially, I came through for Simone for the next 40 years, by the way. So going back to Kaplan Products, after 4 or 5 years of this, there was another period. I started focusing on imported fabrics from the Far East.
Hold on. At what point did you become the president? Were you named president of your father's of Kaplan Products?
Only when I would say 15 years later,
Oh wow.
where
Okay.
my father wanted me to take over the business.
Yeah.
And he was doing everything possible for me to take it over. But I had had too much experience outside the business, which I'll get to.
Okay.
So I started traveling in the Far East, which really gave me a lot of life experience.
Can you tell me which countries specifically?
Japan, Korea, Formosa, um, South Korea, um, the North India, all of the Far East countries, because they all made textiles.
Yeah.
And they were gorgeous textiles.
Is that where you got the piece in your right above your dining room table in the apartment?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Exotic fabrics. They had jacquards, which you have to have a special loom in America to make jacquards. But in the Far East, they instead of mechanized shuttles, they used their hand to weave the fabric. And that was the time that Madras came out from India and took over the whole country. And in any event, my cultural and sexual life in the Far East was incredible. It was just incredible. I was maybe 26, 27, 28 years old. To fly to the Far East, was like 40 hours.
Was Greg born at this point?
What?
Was Greg alive at this point?
Yes, Gregory and Jennifer were both alive. And I liked my children. I liked Jennifer as she grew up, bonded to me. Simone tended to have a terrible temper, and I had to soothe both of them. When Simone lost her temper at Gregory and screamed at her and she hit, she was abused by her parents. Her parents, her mother and her father hit hard, open hand across the face. And that was commonplace. You know, I don't want to get into it too much. But then I would go up and I would sit with Gregory, particularly, and soothe him. And he bonded with me. And both of them saw me as the good parent,
Wait,
even
Gregory
though,
bonded with you, or my
no,
mom bonded with you?
no, Jennifer and Gregory,
Both.
both. Simone, very intensely. And I'm a big disappointment to her now in that I am not involved with your family and not involved with your children.
I
And
am not my mom, Grandpa. I'm a Shira. I
what's
have one.
that?
Never
I
mind.
know you're Shira.
Okay.
I said, but I think I am a disappointment to you too, in that I'm distant. Uh, but be that as it may. But growing up, because Simone was there 24/7, and I was there, uh, I was out of the house most of the time, traveling. And so it was easy for me to be the good parent. Um, and they both bonded to me very much. Gregory was a mixture. Your mother was not. That went on into her 20s. And then she started to really separate from me, which is what she needed to do. Uh, and of course, when she got involved in Israel and Orthodoxy, that was I think, in a deep emotional way, an alternative to me. Coming to terms with the fact that I really was not available the way she needed. It was not a marriage that should have taken a place. If she had had life experience and I had had life experience, we would have known better. I
Okay, but
fear for you.
business.
I fear for you, I want you to know, because you're going on that same road, that you don't have enough life experience with a variety of men to know really who you're really comfortable with. But that's another story. That's an
Thank you.
opinion I have that may or may not be right. So let me go back to the business world. You know, this could be an epic book of 1,000 pages. Uh, so I traveled the Far East and I loved being single and I loved the adventures. And I saw a world independent of Great Neck and independent of Simone and independent of my father, too. And and that went on for about 5 years. So then, about the 10th year at Kaplan Products, I started bringing in footwear, which I saw in Hong Kong, very cheap. And I had made a relationship with a man who at US Rubber. US Rubber was the biggest shoe manufacturer in America, Keds. You've
Yeah,
been at, do you know the name Keds?
of
They're
course.
largely out of business now, but everybody in America
That's
wore,
not true. They're still making shoes.
yeah, that's not their firm anymore. The Japanese bought the name. Um, uh, they were, the Keds came into existence at the turn of the century, where 50% of the Americans lived on farms. And in the spring, the mud was 6 to 8 inches deep. And Uniroyal came up with vulcanization, and they vulcanized boots. And you could put on a pair of vulcanized boots and walk in the mud, and you didn't get wet or muddy. And it revolutionized farming in America. I can't emphasize that enough. To you, it's an interesting detail, but to me, it's like World War I or II. So P.F. Goodrich and Uniroyal were the two largest manufacturing firms in America. And I had gotten a close relationship with the design department of US Rubber. The relationship was not entirely honest. I must add that because it's true.
In what way?
I will leave the rest of that to your imagination.
No,
If you
no.
want more,
You
if you
like
want more,
detail
if
with
you want more details, I will give them to you. You
Yeah,
want more detail?
yes.
Well, in my opinion, there is not a single sale in America where a salesman who is relatively poor is selling something to someone who is relatively rich and or powerful, where bribery does not exist in America. I don't mean 50%. I don't mean 75%. I mean 100%.
So what
100%.
happens in this specific sale?
Now, the bribery could be money. The bribery could be inviting them for 2 weeks on your yacht. The bribery could be prostitution, which I saw a lot of. The bribery could be all sorts of things. The bribery could be no money at all, but you quit your firm and come to work for me in 5 years' time from now. And instead of earning $10,000 a year, you earn 50,000. It's a totally corrupt world out
But
there.
what happened in this specific sale? What happened?
So I met Leslie White, who changed my life. Leslie White had been in the Air Force in England, lost one eye, and he was the head designer for Uniroyal. And I had this special relationship with him, which I've been talking about to you just now. And he and I created fabrics, and it boomed. And at one point, my sales to Uniroyal was as much as Kaplan Products and Textiles on the other half. Everyone looked at me like I was a miracle man. But in my mind, it had to do with corruption more than talent. But in any event, I enjoyed the damn thing.
How did it have to do with corruption?
What?
How did it have to do with corruption? You keep talking in general terms about
bribery. Bribery.
In what way? Give me a story.
Bribery of the people who made the decisions what to use.
What does that mean? How? Give me specifics.
You pay them money. Tens of thousands of dollars in a variety of ways. Okay?
To do what?
To make sure it's my fabrics that's being used rather than someone else's.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's the business world, my dear.
Yes.
And I felt guilty about it. I disapproved of it. But you're either a winner or a loser, and I wanted to be a winner. Now, I started in traveling through the Far East. I came across these footwear in Taiwan, which is now called something else, and I brought them back, and they were mostly shoes, and Uniroyal wasn't interested in it at all. Oh, I went to Italy, to Florence, and I had the idea of making sandals in Japan and Taiwan, Formosa.
How did you get to Florence?
How did I get to Florence?
Why did you?
Florence was the shoe center of Italy.
Why did you begin with?
Because their sandals were more famous. If a woman wanted the best sandals in the world, or the best scarves, or the best handbags, you went to Florence, Italy. Mm-hmm. Florence, Italy was known as the haute couture in all of these areas, very expensive. So I went to Italy. I met this guy, Paolo Coretti, and we went to about 10 shoe manufacturers all over Tuscany, and we got about 20 sandals. Then I took them to Taiwan and Japan and Korea, I forget the details, and said, duplicate them. And I said, I'll be back in 2 weeks because I was wandering around in the Far East. So I came back with 50 shoes and about 5 sandals. Well, Universal had, I'm a young guy still. I'm not even 30. Made in Italy. They had the idea that if they came out with Ked sandals
Hold on,
made in Italy, that would be a big number.
Grandpa, the
What?
internet connection broke up a little bit for a moment. So you're gonna have to repeat yourself because it just broke up. I couldn't hear you. You brought back the 50 shoes, and then what?
And I had a big meeting with all the Ganzamachers. Do you know that? The Yiddish
Big shots.
um, big shots of Uniroyal. I am Jewish. Um, and they picked out one sandal and they said, can you make this in Italy and sell it to us? I forget the details, but I'll make it up for $5 a pair. And I said, possibly. And they said, we're willing to buy 20,000 pair if we could get it for $5. So I go rushing over to Florence. I meet this guy, Paolo Coretti, who is a young guy with a very interesting history, who speaks fluent English. And we go to about 10 manufacturers in Tuscany. I could spend hours telling you about that because it was tremendous adventures.
Tell
And we
me
came
one.
across one guy.
Okay.
What?
Tell me one story from that event.
Let me give you the outline. Otherwise, we'll be together for hours. I'll bore you. And we go to one manufacturer, and he gives us a price and a delivery that he could do it. To make a long story short, he makes 10,000 pair, and we look at it, and the goddamn thing is defective. It's a beautiful shoe, but I forget the details. You had to ink around the edge, and the buckle had to be done differently. And he told me to go to hell, that he wouldn't repair them. And I had 10,000 that were worth $5. That was $50,000. And $50,000 in those days was like, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Paolo Coretti, to his credit, it came from him, not me. He said, Don, we'll rent space in Florence. There are factories near the airport. This is in the center of Florence. We'll hire 5 guys. I'll buy about $5,000 worth of machinery and we'll repair the shoes. And I said, great, that's what we'll do. And I gave him the money. And that's what happened. And the shoes got repaired and they were shipped to Uniroyal, which was the first time Kaplan Products was ever involved in footwear. And Paolo Coretti, on his own, it came from him, he gets all the credit. He hired a fashion person, and they made up 20 or 30 original samples. And he said, let's not close the factory. We have a factory, we have people. Let's keep going. Let's keep the factory going. I say, a factory in Italy? How can I control it? He
What
says,
kinds
I'll
of
run it.
samples? What kinds of?
What?
Can you tell me about the original samples?
All sandals. The sandal, the Amore fashions they were all flat, so we never made a high heel. And, they had straps and a back strap and a buckle, but you could do 1,000 different styles and colors and inner soles. I know a lot about shoes. And I said, I don't know, Paolo, do you know how to make shoes? He said, no, but we could hire someone. Everyone there are 20 shoe factories here in Florence, and I'll hire a person who knows how to make shoes. We have a building. We have already $10,000 worth of machinery, which we needed to repair the Amore fashions. And I said, okay, do it. Lo and behold, when the time comes, I have a 15 patterns, 15 styles. And at the appropriate moment, I show it to Uniroyal, and they pick out one flat called the Amore Fashions, the Amore. And they give me an order for, I don't know, 50,000 pair of the Amore. In Kaplan Products, the biggest sale that maybe ever has been made was $10,000. I may have made it, by the way, to it. The name of the firm that bought the fabric was Amore Fashions, and I named the sandal the Amore in Italian. 50,000 pair. I can't tell you how big that was. So I say, Pa, what are we going to do? He said, we'll buy the machinery. My father is totally cooperating. He says, do whatever you want. We'll open up letters of credit to Florence. And I wanted to buy about 5 big machines and hire 20 people. And you get a factory line where each person does one step. And we hire about 20 people. This is in like April or May. So we start running ads in the local paper, people with experience in shoe manufacturing for a new factory in September. And we get 50 people who want. None of them have experience. They all are bookkeepers. Everyone was a bookkeeper. So we took, I think, 5 of the best bookkeepers, and we taught them what they had to do. And we started supplying the Amore Fashions. And 7, 8 years later, they bought the factories for a great price. And I'm now, how old? 37, 38 years old. I'm a changed person.
When they
In
bought
Italy,
factories.
in Italy, I had all the experiences I should have had in my 20s. I had experiences with women. I had experiences with traveling with other cultures, with being the sweetness of life rather than money. My father and mother both came out of total impoverishment. And to them, everything was financial security. And it was passed on to Morty and I. And in Italy, it wasn't. In Italy, they always, we made our own, by law, there was stoves and cooking equipment, and they all sat down and made lunches for an hour and a half. And I said, this is crazy. And they wanted me to do it. So I said, look, I'll teach you something that was American. So I took out the 4 or 5 top people in the factory. At that point, I had 80 or 90 employees. And I took the 3 or 4 top men, and I took them to a place that I knew in Florence. These factories were in Florence. And I bought them all big sandwiches, panini, grande panini, with meat. And they all ate the sandwiches. And I said, that's lunch. Now we go back to work. And they say, no, no, no. And then they took me to their house where these 5 women laid out the lunch, and we had a 2-hour lunch. So I was learning a culture. They were teaching me. I was coming from America where I knew nothing about the sweetness of life. I knew about making money. My father went through life like this. Do you see my fists?
Yeah.
He was always terrified, no matter how rich and successful and secure he was a frightened man because of his background. And my mother, which didn't stop him, he did everything. That's true bravery. If you're not afraid, that's not bravery. If you're terrified and you do it, that's bravery. And that was my father. My mother, on the other hand, was beaten and was ugly. Uh, and she craved beauty and status and being a movie star. And it couldn't be helped. It came from their backgrounds. It couldn't be helped. Simone, her mother used to call her a salvage. Did you know that? Salvage in
But this
French
isn't
means
about grandma. Mike, wait, I have a question, a clarification.
it's part of my life. No,
Okay.
Simone was called a dirty cow by her mother, a salvage. Uh, so she was a
Grandma, were
very,
you 37 or 38 when you sold the factory, or when you
when I
were
sold the factories,
okay.
which had all sorts of excitement because I was sued by the Communist Party.
Tell me about that.
No, it was very dramatic, and it
So I
was the
want to
most
hear about it. I want to hear about the drama.
it was the most exciting part of my life. The Communist Party, which was there are two unions, the fascists and the communists in Tuscany. And the communists came into my factory and they wanted to know why I was paying the employees for so little money. And by law, they could go through my books. And by law, they could go into my factory and look at every single piece of paper. And they were there for like a month. And I was looking across the way. There was a sweater factory, and I noticed it was empty for 6 months with 2 or 3 people, and I never knew why it was empty. There were hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of machinery, and I knew there was a demand for sweaters, and the factories were empty. So the head communist said, "We have discovered why you're paying the employees so little money. The reason is that you're selling the shoes for too little money. And on your new season, we're going to sit down with you and we will tell you how much you sell your shoes for so you can pay your 80, 90 employees a much higher salary." And I said to them, "You're absolutely right. I appreciate all of this involvement. Thank you very much." At which point, Paolo started looking around in the other county, Umbria. Umbria is right near Tuscany, for factories. And he found 3, 4 empty factories. And late at night during the summer, we backed up 5 or 10 trucks on a Sunday night, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And we emptied out the whole factory into these trucks. And we brought them to Umbria, which is like a different state. It's like Massachusetts and New York, and their laws and everything are different. And when the workers came in, I was not there because I was frightened for my life. I had a group of people and the Carabinieri. We called the police because we knew there could be a riot. And we said, due to the involvement of the Communist Party, we are no longer able to operate. We want you to sign a piece of paper. We will give you your 2 weeks' salary, which the law entitles you to when you fire someone. And in addition, we will give you a gift of 4 or 5 weeks' salary, just as a gift to cooperate. But if you want that gift, you have to sign a release that you will not be a part of any action, legal action, against the owners of the factory. And this was like 80 people, men and women. And the Communist Party was there with a loudspeaker shrieking at them, "Sign nothing. We will get the factory back within 2 weeks at a much higher salary. And this son of a bitch from America, we will teach him a lesson that he will The following day in the newspapers in Florence, it was front page with a picture of myself, this American bastard.
Do you know what newspaper it was?
Oh, yeah, girl. There are four of them. One is a communist paper. That was the one I'm talking about. Then there's the left paper. The communists wore red shirts.
Do you know what the date was of the newspaper? It was the summer.
It was the
Right.
summer. It was the spring, May or June. I don't remember.
Around
There were
what
four.
year? You
There
were
were
like
four
37,
papers,
right?
and the Communist Party did sue me. I was sued for 4 or 5 years, and in Tuscany they found in favor of the Communist Party, and then it went to Rome, to the national government. I had to hire lawyers. There's a law firm here in New York, two brothers. One brother's here and one brother's in Milano. And they specialize in representing Americans in lawsuits. The lawsuit took 5 years, by the way, and cost $15,000, $20,000, which in those days was big money. But in any event, in Rome, they lost the suit. But it took 4 or 5 years and gave me a lot of anxiety. Also, they claimed, and then the government sued me. The government said I was not in a tax this is when I sold the factories. The Communist Party sued, the Rome government sued me. So I had the factories for 7, 8 years. I offered Uniroyal to buy the factories. And I said it would change your whole flavor, made in Italy. And they agreed to buy it at a given price. The head of Uniroyal, with 5 of his people, you're now talking of a company
What was his name?
that was amongst the 10 largest companies in America.
What was his name, the head of Uniroyal?
I have it written down somewhere. I have his name, where you can look him up, by the way, because he's a famous person in terms of business. He arrives, there's a limousine and 5 cars. And it's really a big deal, really a big deal. I can't even remember the name of my factory. I wrote it down in my other book. I would get it for you. It was a woman's name, Janine, something like that, Janine Footwear. I'll call it Janine Footwear. But I don't think it was Janine, it was something else. In any event, he arrives with these 6, 7 people, and he goes to all 5 factories. Now, this man could buy and sell Kaplan products. This is a guy who was famous because they were famous for their tires. Uniroyal tires was amongst the most famous in America then. It's been replaced by others, Michelin, and they were big chemical factories too. I mean, this guy is famous. He built a track. Not many people know about this. In the desert somewhere northwest, and he had the idea that he could have the race cars go around the desert with his tires. You know, U.S. Rubber was famous for tires.
Mm-hmm.
Their big competitor was Michelin. B.F. Goodrich. And he paid, I don't know, $10 million to build this thing. This came out at that time. And he thought he was hot stuff with this idea. And it turned out that every rattlesnake in the area, and there are a lot of rattlesnakes, wanted a concrete that they could sunbathe in. So every rattlesnake within 20 miles headed for his track. And when a car tried to go around the track, it would go over 4 or 5 rattlesnakes, and it would be slippery, and they'd go off the track because the track was tilted, because they were going 150 miles an hour. with Uniroyal tires. That they changed their name to Uniroyal. He was a schmuck. And the reason why he bought my factories is he had become divorced 3-4 years before, and his new wife, Janine, the factories were named Janine Footwear. His new wife was, I'll
Janine.
give you one guess. You're right.
Yes.
How the world turns. He bought the factories, in my opinion, primarily to say to Janine, I just bought a factory with 80, 90 employees, 4 factories in Italy, and it will be named Janine. And I'll put the name Janine on every pair of shoes. And he was a ganze Macher with his girlfriend. And that's a story. How do you like that story?
That's pretty good. That's kind of sad, but pretty good.
Sad and pretty good, because 5 years later, he closed down the factories and all the other people, and the people were all fired. It had an unhappy ending, but I was out of it. So I no longer had to shoot.
You said your career has had 4 stages. The first
Yes.
being your time at Kaplan Products, your second being your time on your own with the shoes.
My first was Kaplan Products, was the shoe factories. The second was fabrics for the garment center. My third was shoe manufacturing, and my fourth was psychoanalysis. I became a psychotherapist then.
So after you sold the factories,
at the age of 37, I was out of the business world, and
wow.
And I was financially independent, and my marriage was ending.
Can you tell me the story about how your father helped you when you were in Italy and you wanted to sell the factories? You told
He
me
helped me repeatedly.
you called
when the
bailed you out.
sale of the factory, when the sale of the factories took place, they have a Jewish lawyer. It's very funny. In Uniroyal, they used to say, act Yiddish and look British. That the Jews in the in the shoe world, the Jews were taking over the world. Uniroyal was the most famous shoe manufacturer in the world. And the Jews, a lot of them coming out of Cuba, by the way, with Castro, opened up factories in Florida and started making sandals, and Uniroyal couldn't compete. So they had this expression, you should dress British because we're American, superior Protestant Americans. They were very anti-Semitic behind my back. But act Yiddish. The goddamn Yids, they know how to make money. That was part of their culture and mentality.
Okay.
It's a part of my life. So my fourth career was.
Wait, but you didn't tell me the story about your father. There was a long.
Oh yes. Well, when it came to selling the factories, we agreed on a price. We agreed on everything, and I knew I had to guarantee everything financially because they're taking my word for everything. They had 2 accountants come and spent 4 months and went over all of my papers and everything to make sure, they weren't buying a lemon, that everything I said was true. And we agreed on a price, and you close in fact in a little town north of Italy in Switzerland. Everyone does that because in Italy, everyone gets sued. The Italian government is totally corrupt, and everyone in Italy is totally corrupt. In Switzerland, there's one city that 2/3 of all the working men are lawyers. That still exists, by the way. It's famous. So we would go there. They hired an American Jewish lawyer who was going to represent them, get a Jew to beat a Jew, a tough guy. He was paid, I think, $30,000 for 2 days or 3 days work. We flew over to Italy together. And we went up to, I forget the name of the town in Switzerland. And then he said, well, we have some problems. He said, first of all, the price is much too high. We have to reduce it by $50,000. And I said, but that's unreasonable. We do blah, 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 blah. He says, that's the deal. I said, okay. And then the second thing is, all of this went through Kaplan Products and Textiles, and the president of Kaplan Products and Textiles is Abe Kaplan, your father. I said, that's right. And he said, well, we want him to sign also that if anything goes wrong, he's totally responsible. You are totally responsible, and he is totally responsible. And I said, no, that I'm willing to guarantee it with me, but I don't know what the hell could happen 5 years from now. He says, then it's no sale. And I had to sell it. So I pick up the phone. I'm going to cry over this, by the way. I always cry.
It's okay.
I pick up the phone. I call my father. I say, you have to guarantee this. And he says, well, what could go wrong? I said, did you cheat them? Or is there something you don't want them to find? And I said, no, everything is 100% honest. But this is Italy. And Italy, everything is corrupt. He says, well, what's the worst that could happen? I said, the worst that could happen is that they could sue you and me together for millions of dollars. He says, what's the likelihood it will happen? I said, the likelihood is very, very small, but this is Italy. I don't know what I can guarantee. He says, can you sell the factories without doing this? And I said, no. How important is it to you to sell them? I said, I've got to sell them because otherwise I think they're going to fail. He said, I'm sorry to offend you. He said, fuck it. Have them come by. And 1 hour later in New York City, 3 lawyers come into Kaplan Products and Textiles with 20 pages, and he had to sign every one of them with a notary. And he signed it. And I said to him, what happens if it all goes bad? And he said, we'll start over.
Why does that make you cry?
The only friend my father had in his life was his wife. He adored his wife. She gave him a hard time, I might add, at different times. But I was a very solitary person. And my father was willing to say, based on my judgment and based on my relationship with him, you know, he was at that age, 65, maybe. He was willing to risk his assets, everything. He might have to sell his houses. That was a big deal. And he said in this phone call that didn't last more than 10 minutes, fuck it, have him come. If you think it's all right, I say, could you blow up? You know, the Italians could do anything. He said, so what? We'll start over. He was saying I was that important to him.
Yeah.
That makes me cry. So the sale went through. And a year later or 6 months later, the Italian government sued me, and Uniroyal sued me. I know Tuscany sued me, and Uniroyal said, if Tuscany wins or Rome wins, then we have to collect all of our money. Rome said that we had done something wrong. I don't remember what. And in Tuscany, they said you were not in the tax-free zone. I ran my factories for 7 years without paying any taxes because I was in a tax-free area. Tuscany was a tax-free area at that time. And Rome said your factory geographically was not in the tax-free area, right? So I hired lawyers, and for those years, it took 4 or 5 years. I was always anxious over it, even though I had done nothing wrong in my mind. Ultimately, we won the suit with Rome. It was in a tax-free area, and we won the area in Umbria that we had done nothing wrong. I had a caseload of papers you wouldn't believe, and I threw them all out. And I was somewhat of a changed person when that was all over. And at that point, I never wanted to touch the business world again.
I don't blame you.
And ever again. I'd gotten friendly with a man, John Schwab, who has died, who is a therapist, psychotherapist. And he had a CSW. He didn't go to medical school. And I said, how could you be a psychoanalyst without being a medical doctor? He said, the people look at you like you're a third-rate professional. And he said, everything's changing. The social workers are taking over psychotherapy. And you'll find if you're a good therapist, you'll have no problem getting patients. So I went to see his therapist.
Hold on. Now you're going into a new part of your life.
That's the last period.
So let's do the last period some other time because we're over an hour now.
Okie doke.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I want to hear, when I was in New York, my mom pointed out to me the apartment that you bought and then flipped and sold to a basketball player. So there was also another part of your life there where you did a little bit of real estate.
Yeah. But actually, Renee was more in the real estate business than I. Renee did a number of lofts.
Yeah.
And converted them and sold them. She was single also, and she went into the real estate business.
Yeah. Okay, we'll talk about all of this at another time.
Okie doke. Bye-bye.
I love you very much. Thank you so much for indulging me.